Hello, my dear friends. My name is Lily, and today I want to tell you a very special story. It is about my family. Please listen carefully from start to end. I promise it will touch your heart and make you think deeply about love, life, and what truly matters. When I was a little girl, my family was my whole world. I lived with my mom, my dad, and my younger brother, Sam. Our home was small, but always filled with warmth. It wasn't the size of the house that made it special. It was the love inside it. My mom would wake up early every morning to make us breakfast. I can still remember the smell of warm toast, eggs, and tea filling the tiny kitchen. My dad, who worked as a carpenter, would sit at the table with his rough hands wrapped around a small cup of coffee. He didn't talk much in the morning, but he always smiled at us. That smile made me feel safe. Sam, my brother, was my best friend. We would race outside in the yard, pretending we were explorers on a secret mission. We would dig small holes in the soft dirt, hoping to find treasure. We never found any gold, but we always found adventure. Even on days when we didn't have much, our hearts were full. One evening, as the sun was setting, I remember sitting on the small wooden bench with my mom. The sky was painted with pink and orange colors. I was only 8 years old, but I still remember her words clearly. She held my hand and said softly, "Lily, family is not just the people who live with you. It is the people who love you, even when they are far away. It is the people who are in your heart forever." I didn't fully understand her words that day, but as I grew older, they became clearer. When I turned 12, my dad got very sick. He had worked so hard for many years, and his body was tired. One night, he was too weak to get out of bed. Sam and I sat by his side. My mom gently wiped his forehead with a damp cloth. She whispered soft prayers, hoping he would feel better. I held his hand and said, "Daddy, you'll be fine. You are the strongest man I know." He smiled at me, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. He knew he was leaving us. A few days later, he was gone. It felt like the light in our home had dimmed. My mom cried softly at night, thinking we didn't hear. But Sam and I did. We lay in our beds, holding each other's hands, wishing for our dad to come back. Life became harder after that. My mom worked day and night, doing small jobs to keep food on the table. Sometimes she cleaned houses. Sometimes she sewed clothes. She never complained. She always smiled when she saw us, even though I knew her back hurt and her hands were sore. One evening when I was 14, I found my mom sitting alone in the kitchen. Her hands were trembling. I rushed to her side and asked, "Mom, what's wrong?" She looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Lily, sometimes life is hard, but we must be stronger than the pain. We must keep going, even when it feels impossible." I hugged her and promised, "I will help you, Mom. I will study hard and make you proud." From that day on, I worked harder in school. I wanted to give my mom a better life. I dreamed of buying her a small house with a garden full of flowers. I wanted to see her smile without worry in her eyes. Sam grew up to be kind and strong. He started working at a nearby store to help Mom. Even though he was only 16, he carried heavy boxes and worked long hours. He never once complained. One night, when he came home with sore hands and tired eyes, I hugged him tightly and said, "I'm proud of you, Sam." He smiled weakly and said, "We're a team, Lily. Always." Years passed, and I finished school. I got a job as a teacher, and for the first time, I could help my mom pay the bills. I still remember the day I brought home my first salary. I gave it to my mum and said, "This is for you." Her eyes filled with tears. She held the money in her hands. Then she looked at me and said, "No, Lily. This is for us, for our family." We saved every little bit, and slowly, we made our dreams come true. We moved to a small, cozy house with a tiny garden. My mom planted roses and daisies. She loved sitting outside in the morning, smelling the fresh flowers. She would close her eyes, and for the first time in years, she looked peaceful. One day when I came home from work, I found my mom sitting on the old wooden bench in the garden. Her hair was grey now, and her hands were softer. She looked at me and said, "Lily, do you remember what I told you when you were 8? Family is not just the people in your house. It is the people who love you forever." I nodded and held her hand. I realized that my dad was still with us, in our hearts. His love, his laughter, and his kindness lived inside us. Now, my friends, I want to tell you something important. Life is not about how much money you have or how big your house is. It is about the love you share with your family. It is about the small moments, the laughter at the dinner table, the gentle hand on your shoulder when you are sad, and the voice that tells you, "I am proud of you." No matter where life takes you, hold on to your family. Call them, hug them, and tell them you love them. Because one day, you will look back and realize that those small moments were the biggest treasures. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. It helps me create more beautiful and meaningful stories for you. Remember, you are never alone. You are loved and you are strong. See you in the next story. As the seasons changed, I carried Grandma with me in my heart. The world around me began to transform. The golden hues of autumn gave way to the frosted silver of winter. I walked home from school one chilly afternoon, my breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. The ground was lightly dusted with snow, and the bare branches of the trees reached toward the pale sky like delicate frozen hands. I clutched my coat tightly around me, but despite the cold, I felt warm inside. The locket rested against my skin, and I smiled softly as I held it. It had become more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a part of me, a part of Grandma. When I reached home, I found my mother sitting by the window with a faraway look in her eyes. She was holding a photograph in her hands, a picture of Grandma, holding me as a baby. Her fingers traced the edges of the photo gently, almost as if she were afraid it might break. "Mom," I asked softly, stepping closer. She looked up, startled, as if she had been lost in a memory. She smiled faintly, though her eyes were still misty. "I miss her too," I whispered. Sitting beside her, she nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the corner of her sleeve. "Some days I still catch myself picking up the phone to call her," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. And then I remember. Her voice faded, and for a moment, the room was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I gently placed my hand over hers. "She's still with us, Mom," I said softly, squeezing her hand. "In every little thing, you just have to look for her." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time she smiled. A soft, genuine smile. "You sound just like her," she whispered. That night, I stood by my bedroom window, watching the snow fall softly outside. The world was quiet and still, as if it were holding its breath. I slowly opened the locket once more and stared at the photograph inside. "Good night, Grandma," I whispered, feeling the warmth of her love in my heart. The winter melted into spring, and the world slowly came back to life. The trees stretched their arms toward the sun, shaking off their frosty coats. Flowers bloomed along the sidewalks, painting the ground with bursts of color. On the first warm day of the season, I walked to the park. The pond shimmered in the afternoon sunlight, and children ran across the grass, their laughter filling the air. I sat on the same wooden bench where I had once spoken to the elderly man, but this time, he wasn't there. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. I had looked forward to seeing him again, to hearing his gentle voice and his wise words. But as I sat there, watching the ducks glide gracefully across the water, I felt a strange sense of peace. I closed my eyes and took a slow, deep breath. And then I heard it, a faint melody drifting through the park, a street musician playing a violin. The sound was soft and haunting, carrying with it a sorrowful beauty, and suddenly my heart ached, because the melody was so familiar. I stood up, following the sound. As I approached, I saw the musician, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair. His eyes closed as he played. The song was slow and tender, filled with longing and love. And that was when I realized it was the same melody from Grandma's music box. My breath caught in my throat. I placed my hand over the locket, clutching it tightly. Tears stung my eyes, but I smiled. When the song ended, I slowly walked over to the man. "That song," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "Where did you learn it?" He looked at me with gentle eyes, surprised by my question. "My grandmother used to play it," he said softly, almost wistfully. "She used to say it was the song she danced to, with the love of her life." My heart skipped a beat. I slowly opened my locket and held it out for him to see. She danced to it with him too. I whispered. For a moment, he stared at the tiny photograph inside. His eyes filled with recognition. A soft smile appeared on his lips. I think, he said gently, they must be dancing to it right now. And I knew with every part of my heart that he was right. The years passed, and I grew older. I graduated from school, started working, and built a life of my own. But no matter where I went or how much time passed, I always carried the locket with me. When I moved into my first apartment, I placed Grandma's music box on the shelf by my bed, and sometimes, on quiet evenings, I would wind it and let the familiar melody drift through the room. On special days, birthdays, holidays, or whenever I missed her most, I would visit the park. I would sit on the same wooden bench and watch the ducks glide across the pond. Sometimes I would close my eyes and imagine the old man sitting beside me, gently throwing crumbs to the birds. I would imagine his voice, reminding me to look for love in the smallest of things. One spring afternoon, many years later, I found myself back in Grandma's old backyard. The house was still the same, weathered but warm, with the familiar creaky steps and the scent of jasmine in the air. I slowly walked over to the swing, the one where I had sat so many times before. I placed my hand on the old wooden seat and closed my eyes. And then I sat down. The swing creaked softly as I gently pushed myself back and forth, just the way I had as a child. The sun was dipping low in the sky, painting it with golden and pink hues. The breeze carried the scent of flowers. And for a moment, everything felt just as it had so many years ago. I reached beneath my sweater and pulled out the locket. I opened it slowly, staring at the old photograph, the same black and white image of my grandparents, still holding each other, still smiling. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the music box. The delicate notes floated through the air, blending with the sound of the wind, and softly, slowly, I began to dance. I closed my eyes and imagined Grandma's arms around me once again, guiding me. I imagined her gentle laughter, her warm smile, and the way she used to hum softly as we moved together. The world faded away, and for those few precious moments, I was a little girl again, dancing with her in the fading light. When the music stopped, I held the locket close to my heart and smiled, and I knew, without a doubt, that no matter how many years passed or how far I traveled, Grandma would always be with me, in every melody, in every breeze, and in every beat of my heart. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe and leave a like. It helps me share more beautiful, meaningful stories with you. And always remember, love never leaves. It simply changes form. It becomes the wind, the stars, the music, and the memories that stay with us forever. You said, continue ChatGPT, said, as the seasons passed, life slowly found its rhythm again. The sting of Grandma's absence softened, though it never fully disappeared. Instead, it became part of me, a quiet ache wrapped in warmth, like the bittersweet melody of her music box. One crisp autumn morning, I decided to visit the park again. The air was cool and smelled faintly of damp leaves and fresh earth. The trees were dressed in shades of amber, crimson, and gold, their leaves falling gently like memories drifting to the ground. I sat on the same wooden bench by the pond, wrapping my scarf tightly around my neck. The water was still, broken only by the gentle ripples of a duck gliding by. I reached for the locket around my neck and held it tightly in my palm, letting the cool silver press into my skin. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. I turned and saw a woman, probably in her mid-30s, walking slowly with a little girl by her side. The child's chubby fingers were curled around the woman's hand, and she wore a bright yellow raincoat that seemed too big for her small frame. The woman smiled as she caught my eye. "Good morning," she said softly. I smiled back and nodded. The little girl suddenly tugged at her mother's hand and pointed at the ducks. "Look, Mommy, they're playing," she squealed, her face lighting up with joy. Her laughter was so pure, so innocent, that it made my chest tighten. It reminded me of my own childhood, when Grandma would take me here and I would point at the ducks with the same excitement. Without thinking, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small bag of breadcrumbs. Grandma used to carry one, just for me. I smiled faintly, holding it out. "Would you like to feed them?" I asked gently. The little girl's eyes widened, and she turned to her mother for permission. The woman smiled warmly and nodded. "Go on, sweetie." The child ran over to me, her small hands eagerly reaching for the crumbs. She giggled as she scattered them over the water, watching the ducks waddle over, bobbing their heads. Her eyes sparkled with the same kind of wonder I once had. As I watched her, I suddenly felt a strange yet familiar warmth settle over me. A presence, gentle and steady, as if Grandma was sitting right beside me. I could almost feel her hand on my shoulder, and for a brief moment, I imagined her laughing softly and saying, "See? You're just like me." After a while, the woman called for her daughter, and the little girl came running back to her side. She turned and gave me a wide, toothy grin. "Thank you," she chirped, her voice full of happiness. I smiled softly. "Anytime," I whispered. As they walked away, I felt a tear slip down my cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was something else, something gentler, warmer. It was the feeling of knowing that I had shared a small piece of Grandma's kindness with a stranger. It was the realization that she wasn't truly gone. Her love was still here. It was in me. That night, I sat by my bedroom window, gazing at the stars. The sky was a vast sea of darkness, dotted with countless shimmering lights. I hugged my knees to my chest and opened the locket once more, staring at the photograph of my grandparents. "Are you dancing among the stars tonight?" I whispered softly. For a moment, a shooting star streaked across the sky, brief and brilliant. My breath caught in my throat. I smiled faintly. "Yeah," I whispered. "I thought so." The months continued to pass, and life carried on. But something in me had shifted. The pain of losing Grandma was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a heavy stone I carried. It was more like a soft, familiar shadow that walked quietly beside me. It no longer weighed me down. Instead, it reminded me of how deeply I had been loved. I began visiting the park regularly. I brought breadcrumbs for the ducks, just like Grandma used to. I smiled at strangers. I helped elderly people carry their groceries. I complimented people's scarves or hats, the way Grandma always did. Little by little, I started sharing pieces of her kindness with the world. One chilly evening, I was walking home from the park when I saw an elderly woman struggling to carry a heavy bag of oranges. Without hesitation, I walked over. "May I help you?" I asked gently. Her tired eyes met mine, and she smiled with quiet relief. "Oh, thank you, dear. That would be wonderful." I carried the bag for her all the way to her doorstep. She turned and held my hand for a moment. Her skin was soft and wrinkled, and her eyes were filled with gratitude. "You're very kind," she said softly. I smiled faintly, feeling a familiar warmth in my chest. "My grandmother taught me," I said simply, and in that moment I knew Grandma's love was still alive. It was in my hands as I helped this woman. It was in my voice as I spoke gently. It was in my smile, my kindness, and the small thoughtful gestures I carried out every day. Grandma's love was in me, and it always would be. Years passed, and I grew older. The silver locket remained with me, resting against my heart no matter where I went. It became worn over time, but I loved it all the more. It held not only a photograph, it held my memories, my love, and my connection to Grandma. One day I sat on the same swing in her backyard, the same one where we once watched the sun melt into the horizon. My own daughter, a bright-eyed little girl with curly hair, ran around the yard chasing butterflies. "Mommy, look!" she squealed, holding out her hands. A small yellow butterfly had landed on her finger. I smiled softly, my heart catching in my throat. I could almost hear Grandma's voice in the wind, laughing with me. I pulled my daughter close and brushed a strand of hair from her face. I unclasped the silver locket from around my neck and gently placed it in her small hand. "Here," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "I want you to have this." She looked at me with wide, curious eyes. "But Mommy, it's yours," she said softly. I smiled, brushing a tear from my cheek. "It was my grandmother's," I said quietly, "and she gave it to me. Now it's yours. It holds her love. And one day, when you're older, you can pass it on too. Because love like this, it never fades. It just keeps growing." My daughter carefully opened the locket, and her tiny fingers traced the edges of the old photograph. She smiled softly. "She looks nice," she whispered. I kissed the top of her head, holding her close. She was, I whispered, and she still is. As we sat there, the sun began to dip into the horizon, painting the sky in soft strokes of orange and pink, and I knew, somewhere, Grandma was smiling too. If you've listened to this story all the way through, thank you, truly, from the bottom of my heart. If it touched you in any way, please subscribe and like this for my hard work. It encourages me to share more stories filled with love, hope, and warmth. And always remember, when someone you love becomes a memory, that memory becomes a treasure. They never truly leave us. Their love lives on, in the small kindnesses we share, in the gentle moments we hold close, and in the hearts they leave behind.